Hello everybody and welcome back to artofdino.com and saveearth.us, and I've got a new Tartarian Tales today, and this is a Tartarian fable, but actually probably not a Tartarian one because it doesn't paint them in the best light. So maybe it's Hungarian or maybe it's something else, but I found it in an Italian newspaper, and I'll check the dates on it and I'll include them below, but I can't think of it right now. But it's a fable for children. It's called The Witch of the Forest Tree. So I came across this and I just absolutely had to share it. And to save some time, I'm going to have some AI put out some imagery that follows the story a little bit. So sit back and enjoy this latest Tartarian Tales number 94. So here we go. Get ready for this. The Witch of the Forest Tree. And keep in mind, it says a fable for children. So here we go. Prince Mirko was the son of a king of Hungary. His father had died fighting against the Tartars, and Mirko was forced to flee for his life. After riding for 7 days, he came to a diamond palace. It was a dark night, and Mirko felt tired and hungry. He entered the palace gates with great haste, but what was his surprise when he saw that it was uninhabited? In the dining room, however, an excellent dinner was ready, and Prince Mirko, after eating, went into his bedroom and lay down to sleep. But he had hardly closed his eyes when 7 great, fierce Tartars came thundering into the palace. "Uh-oh," cried the tallest of the Tartars. "I smell Christian blood." And throwing himself on Mirko, he cut him into small pieces, which he then threw out the window. Remember, this is a fable for children. The next morning, a pretty girl emerged from a hiding place near the palace and poured water over the pieces that had the power to bring the dead back to life. Mirko instantly jumped up, stronger than before, while the girl disappeared. "Oh, oh," cried the tallest of the Tartars, "the little prince is still alive." And again he cut him into little pieces. But the next day he was still alive. The same thing happened on the 3rd morning. The pretty girl poured the water of life over Mirko again and said to him, "I am the princess of this castle. The Tartari killed my father, but now I have no more fear because you are stronger than all of them." So it was indeed. With a stroke of the sword, he cut down the 7 Tartars, and then set out with the princess to seek out their fathers, to pour the water of life on them too. During a night they went into a forest and lit a fire under a tree. "How hot!" exclaimed a voice above. They looked up and saw a Tartara witch sitting in the tree. "Throw this powder on the fire," said the witch, "and it will go better." Mirko obeyed. A strange smoke rose, and the witch came down, saying, "You have killed my sons, the 7 Tartars. Now it is your turn to die." A fable for children. Mirko felt the magical influence spread over him and called the princess for help, but the strange smoke had suffocated her. Luckily, Mirko still had enough strength left to run to the place where the girl kept the miraculous water. Then the 2 boys took the witch and forced her to lead them to the place where their fathers were buried. "I feel like I've been sleeping a long time," exclaimed the old king, rubbing his eyes as soon as the water touched him, and the princess's father observed the same thing. Soon Mirko married the princess, and his father gave Joro the log, making them king and queen. So a very interesting, quick story that I will probably end up actually linking with this next one. I was going to make these 2 separate videos, but I think it's time to make them into one. And so again, you have these Tartar. These guys are tall. They're huge. There's witch. There's magic, which always reminds me of that particular... there's a particular video I did, maybe it was a short or something, where the Christian missionaries came into the Tartars and the emperor, and they were like, and they were trying, the emperor was kind of reading the Christian stuff, and he was like, "Oh, you know, this is very nice. This is like all about how to live and stuff." But he's like, "Unless you can show me anything supernatural, like there's no reason for my people to follow any of this stuff, because what we can do basically supernaturally by moving things with our minds and doing all this other stuff doesn't even compare to the stuff these Christians are pumping out. Basically, the magic versus the whatever ended up becoming of it. Christianity is a good methodology for living, but it doesn't have any supernatural anything in it, and it doesn't show you how to control your mind in ways to experience more, like the Buddhists, the Hindus, all these other kind of different ancient religions, and the Tartarians, who were known for that supernaturalness. So again, this has a little bit of magic. It's a story. It's got cutting kids into pieces, putting them back together. It mentions die a lot. So I guess that is an old thing. It's not just a Disney thing where they constantly mention death in kids' stories and do all these violent things. But again, the Tartars, you have them being like very, they cut people into pieces, little kids. They got witches all over the place. They've got magic. They just come and take over castles. They take over kings. They destroy kingdoms. They do all this stuff. So again, these stories that are all over the place that I really want you to keep in mind when you think about now and how they talk about people from the past that, again, we don't know much about, but they refer to them, they can say anything about them and it will kind of come true because you can constantly re-educate generations and get rid of stuff that goes against that re-education. So even if it's true, which it most likely was, the stuff that they get rid of and replace with nonsense. So that was one story I wanted to read, and now I'm going to go into another article that I found which had to do with pyramids of Tartars. So again, this is another Italian newspaper that I found, and the title is called Pyramids of Human Heads. So I've kind of heard this before, but this one goes into it in a pretty elaborate way. So I wanted to share it again because these are like Tartar horror stories almost. And again, you never know what is true, what got a phone call, that game when like you tell one person something and then the next person changes it and then the next changes it. That's pretty much what our history is. It's a conglomeration of a bunch of liars playing telephone together. And now here we are with a bunch of nonsense trying to piece it back together. So you never know what's true. You never know what is. These Tartars could have been magical beings with extra supernatural powers that were spiritual beyond belief, like the Tibetans that remained and all these other different ones, and they could have tons of skills making these buildings, artistic abilities, making the art inside, the sculpture, making inventions, creating food, all this different stuff. They could have all of that. They had an astronomy in Peking, in Tartar City. They had an amazing astronomical observatory. So keep that in mind with all the other things that they say about the Tartars. They're nomads. They're just vicious. They're brutal. They're all this stuff. Because we have to keep them all together because we've been told one thing by a lot of people and then another thing by a bunch of other people. So somewhere the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So here we go. I'm going to read this article called Pyramids of Human Heads, and this is very interesting. So take into account of this. And again, I had Google translate it from an Italian newspaper in the early 1900s. So again, keep that in mind as well. Pyramids of human heads. History has recorded many of these macabre pyramids of human heads and has made us shudder with the narration of these savage revenges that kings, sultans, and emperors carried out with great serenity of mind, even sneering at the funeral site of mouths atrociously wide open, eyes wide open, in an attitude of spasm, which the word cannot define. So this is, again, pretty intense horror stories of the Tartars. This barbarous custom was more frequent among the great Oriental conquerors. In fact, throughout the pages of the history of the East, we find several examples of it. The triumph achieved after a great battle had its special ornament and joy, the macabre pyramids, which rose up with the fury of heads and heads torn from the bodies of the poor vanquished. Timur, a name meaning iron, was the greatest Tartarian emperor and one of the conquerors of the world. He, to quote Lamartine, was a bloody meteor who passed over the entire Asian continent, from the Indies to the shores of the archipelago. In the fabulous story of Sesostris and Cyrus pales before the glory of Alexander, the barbarian leaders of the Huns and the Mongols. Attila and Genghis Khan completely fade in comparison with the atrocious Timur. Eastern historians have left us a sketch of the portrait of this emperor. I like to report it as Alphonse Lamartine transcribes it. Timur was lame, not from birth, but from a wound received in the siege of the capital of Sistan, shortly before his accession to the throne. It was for this reason that they gave him the name of Tumur Senk, shrunken Timur, which European historians have made Tamerlane. In spite of this infirmity, he had a slender figure and a haughty bearing. You hear different descriptions of this guy everywhere. His voluminous head and his high, broad forehead announced eminent faculties. His hair, naturally white like that of the celebrated Sam, hero of Persian history, offered a curious contrast to the freshness of his complexion. His voice was a sound of slaughter, and his war cry was Surun, S-U-R-U-N, forward. This great yet ferocious conqueror was a celebrated maker of pyramids of human heads and bodies. It is known that in order to punish the inhabitants of Seb-Sawar, a city conquered by Timur and then rebelled, he conceived the infernal thought of raising living lands. For this purpose he had 2,000 men arrested who served him as stones. Those martyrs were placed one on top of the other, and the spaces were walled up with clay and lime. Horrible and monstrous spectacle. The pen refuses to follow the heart-rending details of those piles of human flesh, still full of throbbing, and upon which the most nefarious death descended. So again, keep this also in mind. I don't know, I'm judging just like you are what is true and what is fairy tale again, but keep in mind the pyramid shape of all this. I wonder if, like again, the capstones of pyramids, if that latest Egyptian story is true, what we see on the tops of the pyramids, the Lego block pyramid basically, is so pales in comparison to what potentially could be underneath. So one of my theories is that these pyramids were some kind of capstone to cover whatever technology, ancient technology, these controllers and resetters don't want us to see. So another part of this could be that they were, they obviously are smearing the Tartarians a ton. In pyramids, again, they're smearing a ton. So what if, that's just another anti-pyramid kind of bit of information talking about, these pyramids are nothing. They're just burial sites. Some of them are made up of bodies and skulls. Don't go digging in them. Don't even think twice about the pyramids. There's no technology in there. There's nothing ancient or magical about them. The pyramids you see are probably a bunch of bones left here by Timur. So again, it could be something like that we're thinking, or they could be, they could be the creators of the pyramids, the Tartars. And this could be a way to say, to belittle that and put it back to the Egyptians of the history. Oh, the only pyramids the Tartarians made were of bodies and bones and skulls. And they couldn't have done whatever. So again, I don't know. I'm just putting a bunch of thoughts out there. The potential is endless when we talk about history because we know nothing. We don't know how advanced they were. We just know they were more advanced than us. And they were doing things a little differently, and there was magic, supernatural magic that has been sucked out by the nothing of the never-ending story style governments of our world. But here we go. I'm going to get back into it here. So the pen refuses, blah, blah, blah. The fierce death is done. So the barbarian ruler thus satiated his bloodthirsty thirst by making these pyramids. But let's go further. In the sack that followed the capture of the capital of Persia, Timur had an order published commanding each soldier of his army to collect a certain number of heads. The order of the Tartar chief was carried out to the letter. More than 70,000 inhabitants were massacred, and their heads were used to erect the famous pyramids in the public square. The siege of Baghdad, that's rough, it's intense. You hear both sides of this through these Tartarian tales, and you don't know what to believe, but you got to take it all in and just try to decipher it someday. The siege of Baghdad, which was one of the most painful undertaken by the Tartar chief, ended with the capture of that splendid city. That must have been a battle. Baghdad was put to fire and sword, except for the learned before whom this mighty barbarian bowed. All the inhabitants from 8 to 80 years old were put to the sword. More than 90,000 men were slaughtered, and their heads were used as stones to erect the gloomy pyramids in front of the city's towers. In the siege of Smyrna in December 1402, the atrocities committed by that cruel leader were unheard of. The motive for the sacking of that city was that it was inhabited by many Christians. And again, the Christians ended up winning. They ended up destroying and eviscerating all the information of the Tartars, all of the magic. So again, they wrote this. Who do you believe? How can we tell the real truth about history when it's written by the victors? Here we go, though. In the siege of Smyrna in December 1402, the atrocities committed by the cruel leader were unheard of. The motive for the second was inhabited by many Christians. William of Myrna, charged with defending the threatened city, showed with his men the courage of lions, but the formidable ranks of the enemy, after 15 days of siege, defeated him. The Christian knights tried to save themselves in the vessels that were cruising in front of the city, but the sailors, fearing the fury of the Tartars, repelled them with spears. The shore soon ran red with blood. 1,000 of them were led into the presence of the ferocious Timur, who ordered them to be slaughtered. Their heads were used to raise the macabre 3 pyramids, but since there were so few of them, it was ordered that each head should be placed between 2 stones. The sun of civilization over the centuries has dispelled the darkness of such great barbarism, but has not yet made the other blood of war pale, which Lamartine called the depravity of hearts, which kills what is most sacred in man, piety. Very interesting. From, again, in 1912 edition of the annual edition of Italy, this was found. So, again, very wild. I thought it would be interesting to share some stuff from Italian papers rather than from other your American and whatnot papers that I've been sharing from, or European. So I hope you all enjoyed this. Very interesting take of some of the horrors of the Tartars, the supposed horrors of the Tartars. And we can decipher what is true or not. But again, the victor creates the history. So if at some point these Tartars were either snubbed out, or they were forced back to beyond the poles, or they were forced, or they became us and what we're under now, and then they just wanted to get rid of it and disguise our true history and make it all this different thing, make it a jumbled mess, who knows? The motives for all of this deception are just massive. Any number of things could have happened when you're a controller and you want a people to forget about another people, or you want them to think a certain way about another people, which may have been this way, or they may have been totally different. Again, they can do anything when they control who writes the words and what words stay throughout time and become part of the education of the next group of people of this realm, which is lost. And I hope we find ourselves beyond the poles and we find the answers somewhere here or beyond the poles soon in this lifetime, because I want to know. And I hope you do too. But either way, I hope you all enjoyed this. Stay tuned for more from artofdino.com and saveearth.us, and bless you all.